Have you had any moments lately where you ask yourself, what the heck is going on with humans? I know it's been a heck of a last couple of weeks, especially when it comes to the violence that we have experienced in America. And so this episode is going to be dedicated to addressing how we can treat America's addiction to violence. Stay tuned for this episode of Minding Your Amygdala. Hey creators, welcome to Minding Your Amygdala, the brain, body, and behavior podcast where you'll learn to awaken to your emotions, get informed about your biology, and motivated to use skills to improve your mental health. I'm your host, Dr. Alauna, America's one and only trauma psychiatrist. Do you recognize the critical importance of emotions and mental health? Do you want to know more about how to self-recover from trauma? Do you want to better understand the updated science about how our brain and body shapes our behaviors? If you answered yes to any of these questions, then you're in the right place. This podcast is focused on making complex brain science simple and usable. You'll learn the 6 primitive brain systems predictably programmed by trauma and empathy skills practice, my unique methodology that can help you improve your own thoughts, emotions, and actions. I'm the Skills Over Pills doc, but I'm also a mama 3, a busy entrepreneur, and a human being trying to make it through multiple global pandemics just like you. Minding Your Amygdala will teach you transformative ways that you can approach your day-to-day life, and I'll give you strategies to break free from the trauma cycle. All right, let's get started. Hey, creators. Wherever you are, take a moment, give yourself a hug. Give yourself some love from Dr. Alauna. Give yourself some empathy for all of the traumas that you have gone through this week. Oh my goodness. I'm shaking my head at the state of the world today. And if you're paying attention, you probably are feeling a bit concerned too. It is clear that we must finally begin to deeply understand our most primitive impulses so we can address the wave of gun violence and the wave of just general violence that we are experiencing across the globe. I would love to say that this is just in one place, but show me where humanity is doing well, living calmly, and living peacefully. So because it does not exist right now, we have to make it within each one of us. So do me a favor, take a moment, take a breath, and appreciate yourself, appreciate who you are. If you've been following this Dr. Alauna Minding Your Amygdala podcast, you know that I call you a creator because you are creating at all times. Your thoughts are creative, your emotions are creative, and your actions are creative. And your action today is to listen to this podcast. So I want to thank you for doing your part to take the time to learn about our brain, its biology, and how those things affect our behavior so that we can begin to heal ourselves from the tremendous emotional, spiritual, and psychological mental health crisis that we are facing individually and collectively as a species. So I wanted to focus today's talk on violence because I think it's a good place to walk back from in terms of how violence brings into effect all of these primitive brain systems that I have been talking about over these last few episodes. If you are new to the Dr. Alauna podcast, make sure that you go back and you check out the previous episode, especially episode 4, I believe, where I break down the primitive brain systems, the 6 primitive brain systems that you absolutely must know in order to understand mental health and understand how these things are affected by psychological trauma. So let's dive in because we don't have any time to waste. Every moment that we sit in stagnation or questioning what's wrong with us and what's wrong with society is a moment that is lost, and lives are being lost to the bullets that fly around when our primitive brain gets to feeling violent. So I know, why are you laughing? Why is Dr. Lana laughing? Because all of this we could get control over if we understand where it's coming from. Our problem is we are ignorant AF about how our body and brain works as an entire community. So first, let's define violence. I just looked up violence. The Oxford Dictionary says behavior involving physical force intended to hurt, damage, or kill someone or something. Synonyms are brutality. Another definition is strength of emotion or an unpleasant or destructive natural force. Another is a law, the unlawful exercise of physical force or intimidation by the exhibition of such force. So exhibiting it, even if I don't necessarily put my hands on you, I influence you strongly through intimidation or fear. And this is where we need to dive into as we dissect America's addiction to violence. And yes, I said it. That probably includes you too. Now, a lot of people don't like when I say that we all have addictions, and not liking what I say is not the same thing as it being not being true. So while I can understand that if you've been taught to think of yourself as a person who doesn't have addictions, or if that is a threatening concept to you, that your amygdala may go off and get defensive. Your amygdala being the part of you that creates your internal emotions. Now, your defensiveness does not change the fact that we have grown up in an era where we are steeped in violence and steeped in behaviors that model for us violating ways of interacting with each other. So let's rewind back. We can go 100 years back in history, 400 years, 1,000, 4,000. Hey, go back further. Tell me where human beings were not being tribal and looking at the other group of humans that look different, may speak a different language, who may have resources or other things that we want, and thinking to ourselves, well, we'll just get rid of those and we'll put ours in here. We'll kill their men, we'll rape their women, we'll take their children, we'll erase their culture, we'll knock down their idols, and then we will make it our own. And then we will push our belief systems out onto someone else. And we battled about belief systems for as many years as there has been written and documented language and history taking. After we finished passing the oral histories, we wrote violence into our holy books. Humans have been violent and attempting to survive based on what we feel for a long time. Now, America has its own special brand of addiction. We have the forefathers and foremothers who came here, and I talked about this previously in some of the episodes, that we had communities of traumatized and persecuted people who came to America, and even in their own persecution and relief from persecution, they used their superficial observations and thought processes to tell themselves that the Native Americans were animals and that they could take advantage of them and do whatever ungodly things that they did to those indigenous communities, and also told themselves delusional, fixed false belief thought processes about Africans, which is why they went over there and kidnapped and raped and abused so many Africans for so many years. And even until recent times, only in the last 100 of years have women been considered somewhat equal. And still, we live in a society that hasn't fully decided that women and men should manifest with the same freedoms. We live in a society that still references other human beings as less than human based on superficial subjective labels that we place on each other. We still live in communities that have been targeted by systems of thinking that encouraged drug use, alcohol use, poverty, gun violence, and discouraged people on almost every turn. And we act as if we are confused as to why human beings will fight back with violence or whatever other means they believe are necessary for their survival. And then we look at each other and we judge each other, and we continue the cycle of violence and addiction to violence, because violence doesn't start with the punch. Violence actually starts with your internal state. Violence starts with the thought process. So it's important for us to dig into, how does our brain process information? And one of the things that it's important to understand is that violence can make you feel good. It will give you dopamine. If you've ever gotten to an argument with somebody and won that argument by overshouting them, or even get into a fight, you may not like what happens in that fight, but it certainly is a rush. And winning a fight is even more of a rush. And if you think about the language that we use in our sports, in our politics, in many of our interactions with each other, our language reflects the fight and the violent nature of the way that we think about each other and the way that we think about ourselves. We're going to come back to that part. Whether you live in inner city communities and have gun violence because of the years of removal of basic societal safeties in those communities, or live in rural America where you also have environmental threats and the threat of being so far from other people, there are reasons why people want to have their guns. So let's be clear that I understand why guns are such a fundamental part of America and American society. Having a gun, in a very real sense, up until recent times, having a gun was part of a requirement for survival, because we have been such a tough, rough, cutthroat type of society in so many ways, in so many layers. And in fact, as we have represented violence in almost every layer of what we do as a society. Let's think about this. So Your brain reward system, your addiction system is driven by dopamine, a pleasure chemical. Anytime you do something that feels good, dopamine is there. And when it bursts out, it can feel great, but it goes away quickly. And your body constantly wants more dopamine. We can be addicted to salt, sex, sugar, alcohol, tobacco, nicotine, cocaine, opioids, each other, salaries, porn, social media, validation, being right. So many things that we are addicted to. And those things have a tendency to drive how we think about and structure so many factors in our society. If you think back to the beginnings of television and film in America, our first major television and film events were depicting Westerns, depicting a constant diet of who's getting the best of whom, right? And that's only increased over the years. Even our cartoons, they're often violent. The characters are carrying out storylines where they fight or where you have a villain and a hero. Our television shows are often violent, especially our reality television shows. And the newer generation of television are demonstrating how much we revel in seeing people argue and beat each other up. Our movies are dystopian. Very rarely do you see a movie that actually has a happy ending for the world or even a happy beginning. We are manifesting where our minds are, and our movies and our media, they show the evidence of how we think. Our news, if you just go pick up your news and look at your local news, you're going to pick it up and see robberies, gun violence, road rage. You're going to look up and see climate change, droughts, storms, floods, and all types of other chaos. Those things are traumatic too. And these are acts of violence upon communities when our political representation is so engaged in their drama that they are not addressing the realities of their constituents. Speaking of politics, the violence in our politics is real, and it's part of our overall addiction. How we talk to each other, the way that we speak has violence in it. We use extremes of language and extremes of words and extremes of concepts, and that gets a rise out of people. That triggers that dopamine, that triggers the clicks, the likes, the reactions. And these are the things that these algorithms are driven on. And so we are, in a sense, in our politics, even caught in the addiction cycle. Our comedy, our comedy is violent. Look at our comedians. Look at our actors and actresses and how we interact with each other, even from the stage. We use our own beliefs and wrong judgments, harmful judgments of other people to laugh and create caricatures of other people simply because we lack empathy for the stress or the strain or what the world has done to them. Our thoughts are violent. How many times have you thought to yourself, ooh, I'm that person if I got that opportunity? Oh, I don't have too many people I consider enemies, but ooh, buddy, I mean, there are a couple people that I have considered if they should get a brick through that window. Okay, you know what I mean? People, listen, let's keep it real. We are in a culture where it would be strange if we did not have thoughts about fighting, punching, kicking, hitting, or hurting. And that's not to say that you act on it. I'd venture to say that the majority of people do not act on these thoughts and feelings and impulses and surges and urges. Many times, what you would want to do on someone else becomes internally directed, and people become more harmful to themselves and violent mentally with themselves and in exchange maybe for not letting it out. But here's where we are as a society. When you have operated in a space where your words are violent, your thoughts are violent, your culture is violent, your history is violent, and you have never made the space to recognize how all of these layers of violence affect the way that we think every day. We submerge ourselves in video games. And now, don't get me wrong, I grew up in the video game culture. I loved video games. But we've gone from Carmen Sandiego, Pitfall, and Mario, Super Mario Brothers, to games where we can immerse ourselves in shooting and killing and fighting and dominating other people. And in whatever fantasy world that may be in, ask yourself if you spend hours and hours in a certain mental space, and then you go into the world and you get triggered by something that happens in your environment, would you not be desensitized to violence and carrying out violence if you have spent the majority of your life submerged in violent environments? Dopamine is a hell of a drug. And it doesn't matter which drug you're using, you're still getting to that core human chemical of dopamine. And violence provides a perfect pill for us to be addicted to, because it perfectly fits the predictable cycle of addiction: intoxication, withdrawal, craving, tolerance. Then you need more of that thing to get intoxicated with it again. Let me go through it again. When people are in the addiction cycle, there's an intoxication that we get when we get our violence fix. When you are used to an argument and your environment has constantly been people arguing, bickering, or making snippy, snappy comments, you will be operating in that mode as well. And not only will you expect it, but you will play into it. You will find yourself doing the thing that bounces off of that violence that comes towards you. So the intoxication and the dopamine that we get when we exercise violence in our thinking, through being judgmental of other people, through being harmful with the way that we perceive them and the labels that we put on them, that gives you dopamine. And then when you get your intoxication, very quickly, very soon, that withdrawal is coming. I got to find something else to give me my fight fix, whether it's go and get into my sports, or go watch that TV show, or go dive into somebody else's drama, or call up somebody on some gossip, or dive into the politics. It is the addiction to violence. And the withdrawal, when we don't have it, leads into that craving, right? So after that withdrawal period, you get in that period where it's like, man, I got to know what's going on. I got to see what's next. There it is right there. Something to be mad about, something to feed my hate, something to feed my fear, something that makes me right again, and on the cycle goes. So, how do we address a problem that is so multifactorial? It really irks me when people say things like, guns don't kill people, people with guns kill people, or people kill people. I'm like, people with guns kill people. Yeah. Like, if they had knives, people would be hurt, but not as many would be dead. And if they didn't even have that, then, we could go back to fist fighting. But we have our technology and our ability to create weapons of war, weapons of mass destruction, weapons of quick destruction has exceeded our understanding of our own internal technology and what it means for us to feel hurt, to feel aggrieved enough to want to harm someone else, for us to be so addicted to violence that we don't even consider the amount of aggression that we consume on a day-to-day basis. So what can you do? Because all of this is a whole lot of information, but you don't feel like you the problem. You're like, wait a minute, doc, I'm not out there shooting people. That's them. Well, guess what? You may not shoot people with your gun, but you certainly shoot them with your words, and you certainly shoot them in your thoughts with the way that you think about people. And if we are to create a healed and healthy and happier society, it will require each and every single one of us to do our own work on figuring out how to curb what's going on inside of our own minds. I'm not saying don't be aware. Don't even start, y'all. I'm about my gun. I'm about you having your gun rights, and please don't even start with me because having access to a firearm and knowing how to use it to defend yourself and to secure it to make sure that it does not become a harm to your family, those are two different things. And we are in this space where people do not seem to be able to think in relative format and get out of this black and white thinking as if doing anything is going to lead to doing everything. That's a very black and white, binary, extreme, and primitive way of thinking about solutions to gun violence. And yes, we need to secure schools. Yes, we need to have protocols in law enforcement. And yes, we need to increase the age in which people can purchase these type of weapons. And yes, we need to increase the mental health funding in schools so that it's inherent and it's brought into the school on all levels, not just when the kids are in trouble, but teaching them about their emotions in the first place so that we proactively help them to recognize when they need help and to have skills and tools. All of this is important, and all of these things are steps that can be taken. And we also have to do this individual work where we begin to recognize that we must choose peace. It's okay to know that you got the violence in you. I like knowing that if I need to, only in the most extraordinary situation, if I had to, I'll fuck you up. If don't make me, but I do it. Like nobody's asking you to not know that you got that in you and that you would need to pull that out. You could pull that out if you needed to. However, it is a feat and it is important to recognize that there should be no such thing as anyone losing control of themselves or getting so angry that they act in rash, volatile, short thinking ways, because we can learn to process our thoughts and process our emotions and process those invisible urges and surges that make us want to engage in behaviors and repeat behavioral patterns that create chaos and pain and other things that we do not want to experience. Our brains are that powerful that when 8 billion human creators are on primitive mode, it will lead to fear, it will lead to pain, and it will lead to what we are experiencing now. Our job is to choose peace. Our job is to choose peace. What does that mean? It means choosing to work on your own self. and figure out where your own violence detox needs to happen, whether it's detoxing from the news, from social media, whether it's getting out of the rigmarole of your workplace for long enough to let your mind calm and soothe and do some meditation, whether it's stopping your kids from playing with guns. I'm really in that space myself where I'm like, I don't think guns are good toys. There's lots of other toys. I want my children to understand guns as very powerful, important, and potentially deadly things. So I'm really cutting down and cracking down even within myself to wean my kids off of the violence, paying attention to the things that are on the television and the storylines and the story plots that they watch on television, especially on YouTube. People can upload all kinds of things that they say kids can watch, but really have a lot of violent and aggressive themes in them. Nobody's saying don't know how to fight. We don't want you to know how to fight. What I'm saying is that knowing how to fight and knowing when to fight and being controlled in what you do mentally and physically is part of breaking the addiction of violence in America and in you. I hope that makes sense for you all. And if you'd like to learn more about psychological trauma and get a brain, body, and behavior approach to psychological trauma and healing from trauma, I hope that you'll join me at the Trauma Cure on June 22nd through 24th. You can get your tickets at thetraumacure.com. Join me next week on the next episode of Minding Your Amygdala. I'm Dr. Alauna, trauma psychiatrist, and I want you to know you can heal.